He jumped off the truck, sprinting through shattered glass, torn blood bags, and silence thick enough to choke, his eyes searching, heart pounding. Then a sound. A bark. Faint. From behind a rusted gurney. His partner, his K9, was there, trembling but alive, in the one place no one thought to look, the medical waste zone of a classified facility. What was he doing there? And why did the military want to erase him? If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. It was 2:57 in the morning when Calendre's phone rang. Not just any ring, that ring. The one they said would never come again. He sat up instantly, heart pounding in the silence of his small apartment. The room was still dark, lit only by the soft glow of a street lamp outside. On the floor, curled up beside the door like a shadow, was Fen, his Dutch shepherd partner, his other half. Fen's ears perked up at the same moment Callan answered the phone. "Dre," said a low voice on the other end. "This is Major Hain. Report to Station 12. Level red. Containment breach. Bring full gear and your K9. 30 minutes. The line went dead. Callan didn't need to ask questions. He had heard enough. Code red meant biological threat. Containment. Breach meant something dangerous had gotten loose. Dangerous enough to call up a retired field medic and his dog at 3 in the morning. "You ready, boy?" he whispered. Fen was already up, alert. Eyes locked on him like he'd understood every word. The drive through the quiet outskirts of town was fast. Roads were empty. The highway stretched like a ribbon under the moonlight. Callan gripped the wheel with one hand. The other rested near Fen's seat. They had done over 30 operations together before retirement. Afghanistan, Syria, homeland training exercises. Fen had a nose that could detect dozens of chemicals and bio-threats, faster than any lab equipment. They were the last line in situations where seconds made the difference between safe and sorry. When they reached Station 12, the place was crawling with military trucks. Floodlights pierced the fog. Soldiers in hazmat suits moved quickly in every direction. Helicopter blades chopped the air from the landing pad behind the main building. Callan pulled his vehicle to a stop and stepped out. Fen followed close, wearing his protective gear like a second skin. Major Hain stood under a large tent studying a map table. He looked up as Callan approached. "We've got a breach," he said, cutting straight to the point. "Remote site in the Florida wetlands. Research, facility, civilian staff unaccounted for. Your unit's being reassigned to assist Alpha Squad. You and your K9 are going in with the second wave." Callan nodded once. "What kind of agent?" "Unknown," said Hain, "but reports suggest neurological effects. Memory loss, confusion, possible aggression." Fen let out a low growl, sensing the tension. "We don't have eyes on the internal conditions," Hain continued. "Communications are unstable. We need identification of whatever this is, and fast. You're cleared for full access." Callan didn't like the sound of it. Something about the whole setup felt rushed, uneasy. Minutes later, they boarded a transport truck with 6 other soldiers. The inside was silent. No jokes, no chatter. Just the hum of the engine and the distant sound of frogs in the swampy, dark Fen sat between Callan's legs, unmoving, focused. "First time with a K9 unit?" a young soldier asked from across the truck. Callan gave a faint smile. "He's not new. Neither am I." He looked down at Fen, gently resting a hand on his back. "He saved more lives than most of us put together." The soldier gave a small, respectful nod and said nothing more. By the time they reached the outer perimeter of the facility, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a gray-blue light over the swamp. The area should have been full of birds, insects, life, but it wasn't. It was silent, still. The only movement came from the hazy mist drifting across the ground. "Disembark," came the order. Callan followed the squad into the unknown. Radio signals began to crackle, then fail entirely. Communication with the main base was down. A thick tension filled the air. Even the wind felt off, heavy, slow. Callan released Fenn's lead, giving the command, "Seek." Fenn moved ahead, nose to the ground, scanning the area with practiced discipline. His body language told Callan something was here, but not what. Not yet. As the team moved deeper into the woods, floodlights from the medical tent suddenly snapped. A siren screamed from somewhere behind the compound. Chaos followed. Voices yelled over the radio, two scrambled to make out. Then came the bark. One short bark. Then two. Callan's heart dropped. That was Fenn's trained signal for a detection. Something real, something dangerous. Fenn's got something, Callan shouted, but no one seemed to hear him over the noise. Just then, a group of soldiers in hazmat suits rushed from the trees. "K9 team, we need your dog," one of them shouted. "Medical containment team, critical patients, now." Before Callan could object, another soldier stepped in front of him. Orders from Division Command. "Your dog's being reassigned. Emergency detection protocol. You are to report to Command Post Delta." Callan's instinct screamed to say no, but procedure was clear. In high-level threats, dogs could be reassigned to medical detection. Still, he didn't like it. He knelt beside Fenn. "I'll find you soon, boy," he whispered, brushing his hand over the dog's ear. "Stay sharp." Fenn looked at him for a long moment, then followed the hazmat team into the blur of flashing lights and noise. It was the last time Callan would see him, for a very long time. 3 weeks had passed since Callan Dre last saw his partner. 3 long weeks of silence, half answers and closed doors. The official report said Fenn was lost during containment transfer, but Callan knew better. Fenn wasn't just a military dog. He was a partner, a survivor, and the best detection K9 Callan had ever seen. There was no way he just disappeared. Still, the base doctors were quick to call it stress exhaustion. They wrote him a medical leave order and told him to rest and recover. But Callan didn't need rest. He needed the truth. He tried to keep things official at first, sending emails, calling old contacts, filing a formal inquiry. But every time he asked about Fenn, the answer was the same. Classified. Or worse, no such unit listed. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And that was when he stopped trusting the system and started digging on his own. Callan's small apartment turned into a command center. The coffee table was now covered in notes, maps, and a laptop with blinking red dots on several files. He cross-checked transport schedules with supply logs. He dug through public records and pieced together scraps of information that didn't match. Why were unmarked vans leaving the wetlands facility days after the operation had ended? Why did the list of evacuees include more animal units than were ever reported missing? The threads didn't just look strange. They looked planned. He wasn't alone in his doubts either. One afternoon, he got a message from Neva Kaldor, a logistics technician who'd worked the night of the mission. She had noticed missing inventory files, especially ones marked for external biological support. When she asked about it, her access was suddenly revoked. "I think something happened with your dog," she told Callan over a quiet phone call. "And I don't think it's just about a virus." Callan leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He needed to go deeper. He drove out to a location that kept popping up in his search. North Medical Reserve, a supposedly abandoned hospital north of the city. Officially, it was listed as a non-operational storage site. But from his car, parked half a mile away, Callan could clearly see lights on inside. Security patrols circled the chain-link fence. White vans pulled into the back every few hours. And one night, while watching through a pair of binoculars, he saw a man in a gray uniform crouch behind the fence and toss something gently toward a dark shape. It was too far to be sure. But Callan thought he saw fur. The next day, he called in the only person he trusted completely, Bram Keene, a quiet tech expert who'd once been part of Callan's field team. Bram had since moved into private cybersecurity, but he owed Callan a favor. "You think they're keeping the dogs in there?" Bram asked as they looked over photos from the night before. "Not just keeping," Callan said. "Hiding." Bram used a long-forgotten staff login to pull up archived maps of the North facility. Most of it was empty rooms and sealed corridors, but one wing, marked Zone 4, had been modified 6 months earlier. It had reinforced doors, ventilation systems, and advanced climate control. "That's not storage," Bram said, eyes narrowing. "That's containment." Then came the breakthrough. Using old delivery records, Callan found a repeating entry, deliveries from a company called Pinebrook Veterinary Logistics. Their packages went directly to Zone 4 every Tuesday and Friday. Each invoice listed specialized canine medications and biorecovery supplements. Callan stared at the screen, his heart thudding. This wasn't just about containment. It was ongoing. Treatment. Maybe experimentation. And one more thing caught his eye. On the bottom of one invoice was a note. Protocol 8D, Recovery, candidates from Fenmore Response Unit. Fenmore was their call sign. "He's in there," Callan said quietly. "I know it." Bram looked at him. "If you're going in, you'll need proof. Not just suspicion." Callan nodded. "I'm going in, but not alone." That evening, with his hood pulled low and a camera slung around his chest, Callan returned to the fence line near Noreth. The sky was turning gold as the sun dipped behind the trees. He watched, waited. At 6:52 p.m., like clockwork, the same van from the invoices pulled into the facility. This time, Callan crept closer. He stayed in the shadows. No noise, no sudden movements. Just slow, careful steps until he reached a gap in the fence where an old maintenance pipe ran under the outer wall. It was narrow, but big enough. He ducked inside. The smell hit him first. Disinfectant, rubber, and something else. Something like fear. He moved through the service tunnels beneath the building, his boots making soft taps on the concrete floor. The air was colder here, and strangely quiet. He reached a small vent that looked into Zone 4. He pressed his camera to the gap. Rows of kennels, wires, IV bags, machines that beeped softly in the dim light. And then, in the far corner, he saw it, a cage with a dark figure curled inside. It lifted its head. Even through the shadows, Callan knew those eyes. Fen. He was alive. Tired, thinner than Callan remembered, but unmistakably. Him. "I've found you," Callan whispered. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Callan Dre lay on the cold floor of the tunnel beneath Noreth Medical Reserve, his breath steady, heart racing. Above him, just through a small maintenance grate, was Zone 4, the place they weren't supposed to see, the place the official reports pretended didn't exist. He had seen Fen with his own eyes, curled up inside a kennel in the far corner, lean, quiet, alive, but not safe. It took everything in Callan not to burst into the room right then. But one wrong move could cost everything, not just Fen's life, but the others too, because now he knew there were others. The kennels stretched across the room, 4 dogs in total, each alone, each hooked to strange equipment. Machines beeped softly. In the background, a small monitor next to each cage displayed vital signs. Notes were taped beside them, but the writing was too far for Callan to read clearly. He crawled back from the grate and began to plan. The next morning, Callan met Bram and a new ally, Roan Lister, a journalist who specialized in military oversight and animal welfare. She had a reputation for exposing secret programs that blurred ethical lines. She listened without interrupting as Callan described what he'd seen. 4 dogs, including mine, he said, all in medical enclosures, notes on their cages. One had the phrase "final phase" on a clipboard nearby. Roan's face tightened. That usually means the end of observation, termination. Callan looked down. "I'm not going to let that happen. You need proof," she said. "Real footage. Something the public can't ignore, and we'll need to move fast. If what you saw is correct, they don't have much time." Bram pulled out a small black case and opened it to reveal 3 button-sized cameras. "These transmit directly to a private server I control," he said. Wireless, encrypted, and invisible to most motion detectors. We can set them up to stream the footage as soon as they're placed. Callan nodded. Tonight. That night, Callan returned through the drainage tunnel, this time more prepared. He moved through the corridor with slow, silent steps, each one rehearsed in his mind 100 times. Every squeak of his boots felt like thunder in the empty halls. He reached the same vent and slipped the first camera into a gap between the wall tiles. Then the second, hidden behind a broken electrical panel. The third went inside a storage closet with a clear angle on the kennels. The feed came online. Roan and Bram, watching from a safe house a few miles away, confirmed the signal. "We're live," Bram whispered over the comm. "Clean image. People are going to see exactly what's happening." Callan stayed just long enough to read the labels now visible on the screen. Kennel 3, Fen, Subject 8D, Resistance Noted, Handler Bond Correlation High. Scheduled for evaluation, 48 hours evaluation. He didn't like the sound of that word. The next 24 hours passed slowly. Roan sent still frames from the footage to her contacts in the media world. Bram watched the feed for changes. Callan studied maps and memorized every path out of the building. The plan was set. At 2 a.m. they would go back, not just to gather more evidence, but to act. Roan handed Callan a small chest camera barely visible under his jacket. "If things go wrong," she said, "the footage keeps you safe. People will see the truth." Callan just nodded. He had no more words left to waste. That night, the world was still. No wind, no animals, no guards in sight. Perfect. Callan entered, through the same tunnel. The path was memorized by now. He moved with purpose, staying low, quiet, focused. At the edge of the kennel room, he pulled open a maintenance door using a stolen key card Bram had faked. The soft hum of machines filled the air. Then came the sound that nearly broke him. A faint whine. Fen had smelled him. Callan stepped closer to the cage. Fen's eyes locked onto his. They didn't bark. They didn't need to. He opened the lock quietly, disabling the alarm attached to the door. Fen didn't move at first, unsure if he was dreaming. Then Callan dropped to one knee. "It's me," he whispered. "I'm taking you home." Fen stepped forward slowly, his body trembling, and pressed his head gently into Callan's chest. They stayed that way for a moment longer than they should have. Then Callan moved to the other cages. Each dog had a name, a story, a service record. Milo, 7 years in explosives detection. Raya, 5 years protecting border patrol units. Brisk, trained for chemical exposure response, like Fen. He opened their cages one by one, using quiet words and slow movements. Despite their condition, their training kicked in. They followed him silently, forming a small unit behind him. As they moved toward the exit, a voice called out, "Hey! What are you doing here?" "A guard." He stepped into the hallway, hand on his belt radio. His eyes widened at the sight of the dogs. "They're being terminated tomorrow," Callan said firmly, not slowing. "I'm not letting that happen." The guard hesitated. His eyes met Fen's. And then, he stepped aside. "I don't want to know," he muttered. "Go." Callan nodded once in thanks and disappeared into the dark with the dogs. They made it out the tunnel and into the woods. Safe, for now, and on every screen connected to the live feed, people across the country were watching. The world now knew, but the battle wasn't over yet. The cabin was small, quiet, and tucked deep into the woods. For now it was enough. Callan Dre sat on the floor beside Fen, running a gentle hand through the dog's fur. Fen was finally sleeping soundly, his breathing slow and steady. The other 3 dogs, Milo, Raya, and Brisk, were curled up on blankets, nearby, safe at last. Outside, the sun was just rising, but Callan wasn't watching the sky. He was watching the screen. Roan's laptop was open, showing the live stream that had now been watched by nearly 2 million people. Clips of Callan freeing. The dogs had gone viral overnight. People around the world were reacting. Military veterans, animal lovers, journalists, even celebrities. The footage was raw and emotional. It didn't need flashy editing. The truth spoke for itself. News outlets began reporting the story as soon as they verified the location. Military dogs held without consent, one headline read. Canines rescued from secret lab, said another. But for Callan, the biggest surprise came that afternoon. Roan got a call. "It's Senator Vale's office," she said, covering the phone. "They want to meet." Later that day, Callan, Roan, and the four dogs drove quietly into town. They met Senator Corin Vale in a private office inside a local courthouse. He wasn't a flashy man, gray suit, kind eyes, and a voice that carried calm. "I've watched everything," Senator Vale said, pointing to the laptop screen. "I've spoken with other handlers. You've done more than just save 4 dogs. Mr. Dre, you've shown us a system that's broken." Callan didn't answer right away. He just looked down at Fenn, who sat proudly beside him. "He's not equipment," Callan finally said. "He's my partner. My family." Vale nodded. "I agree, and that's why I'm introducing a bill. We're calling it Fenn's Law. It will recognize military working dogs as service members, not property. It'll guarantee their right to proper care, retirement with their handlers, and protection from being used without consent." Callan stared at him. "You think it'll pass? With what you've done?" Vale smiled. "I think the public will make sure it does." Within a week, the story exploded on every major platform. Handler after handler came forward, sharing stories of dogs who'd gone missing under strange circumstances. Families who never got answers. Units who felt abandoned. Each story added weight to Callan's mission. Roan published her full article with all the footage, interviews, and evidence. It painted a clear picture, one the government could no longer deny. Protest followed. Lawmakers responded. And within days, the Department of Defense released a formal statement confirming that an internal investigation was underway. The Noreth facility was shut down. Officials involved were placed on leave. The most powerful moment came when Callan was invited to speak at a public hearing in Washington, D.C. He stood on a simple stage. Fenn sat beside him. The room was packed. Reporters, politicians, veterans, and people who'd followed the story from the beginning. Callan stepped up to the microphone, took a breath, and began. "This is Fenn. We've worked together for 9 years. We've been through explosions, storms, fires, and missions we weren't sure we'd survive. And through it all, he never left my side. When the mission ended, they told me he was gone, that it was just part of protocol, but it wasn't. It was a lie to cover something they knew was wrong. Military working dogs are not tools. They are living, breathing partners who risk their lives for us. They trust us to protect them the same way they protect us. And we failed them. But today, I ask that we stop failing them." The room was silent. Then, slowly, people began to stand. Applause filled the chamber. That night, the vote passed to move Fenn's Law forward. Over the next few months, things changed fast. Handlers were reunited with dogs they thought were lost. New policies were put in place. Military dogs were now given full retirement rights, and their handlers had first claimed to bring them home. And Callan? He used the money raised from a support fund to buy a piece of land on the edge of town. There, with help from Roan and Bram, he built something new, the Promise Run, a home for retired service dogs, a place where they could rest, recover, and feel the love they had more than earned. Callan often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the dogs run free across the field. Fenn stayed close by, always alert, always watching, but now finally at peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, a small group of kids came by for a visit. Callan smiled as Fenn trotted out to meet them, tail wagging, ears perked. "He's the reason everything changed," Callan told them softly, and he never said a single word. Sometimes, he thought, the loudest truths came from silence, and when truth has teeth, it never stops biting until the world finally listens.